Welcome to the G Word.
I would also say it's okay to grieve the child that you didn't have that you thought you were going to have. I just think that's so important. And I think for me, the most difficult thing in the early couple of years was feeling like I couldn't do that because nobody appreciated that I'd actually lost anything.
My name is Naimah, and I'm Head of Product Engagement and Growth at Genomics England. On today's episode, I'm joined by Sean Pye and Sarah Crawford, who are parents of Joey, who was diagnosed with DYRK1A syndrome at the age of 13, and Sarah Wynne, CEO of Unique, a charity which provides support, information and networking to families affected by rare chromosome and gene disorders. Today, Sean and Sarah are going to share Joey's story and discuss how their role in writing the BBC comedy drama There She Goes has helped to raise awareness of people with rare conditions in mainstream culture. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love your support. Please like, share and rate us on wherever you listen to your podcasts. So first of all, Sean and Sarah, I wonder if you could tell us a bit about Joey and what she's like.
Yes, so the medical stuff is that she's got DYRK1A syndrome, which was diagnosed a few years ago, which means that she's extremely learning disabled, non-verbal,
autistic traits,
eating disorder, very challenging behaviour. She can be quite violent. She can be quite unpredictable. Doubly incontinent, let's throw that in. She's 17, but she obviously has a sort of childlike persona, I would say. She sort of likes things that toddlers like toys and that sort of thing. But that's the medical thing. What's she like? She's a vast mixture of different things. She can be infuriating, she can be obsessive, but she can be adorable. She can be very loving, especially to her mum.
She's very strong-willed. Once she knows she wants something, it's impossible to shift her, isn't it? So she's got a lot of self-determination.
So her obsession at the minute, or it's fading slightly, which is quite funny, is that she's become obsessed by, there's a toy called a Wooz-It that she loves, but she became obsessed by the idea of, she was typing Buggy Baby Wooz-It into her iPad. So that's how she communicates. She's got quite good sort of literacy skills. And we figured out eventually that what she wanted her mum to take her to the park to find a buggy with a baby in it that also had a Wooz-It in it, that she could steal. And when Sarah explained to her at some length that it was not yours, she would say, it's not yours, that drove her insane with excitement at the idea that she could steal another child's toy. So it's a good example of her because it's funny, and when it is funny, and she's so cheeky about it. And she flaps her hand; she's very hand flappy, and she sort of giggles and she gets really excited. Yeah. But the 2000th time she asked to do that, and we have to walk to Mortlake Green near our house, and to the point where, again, it's funny when it happens, but you get to the green and she doesn't even look for the buggies anymore. So that's an example. But she's a lot of different things, and I suppose the thing that is dawning on us at the minute is that she's 17, she's going to be 18 very soon. And the list of presents that she gets on her birthday is always the same because she's autistic. So at Christmas, she always gets the same presents. But the idea that for her 18th birthday, we're going to have to buy children's toys and,
toddlers
toys and everything it's sort of hitting home. But that's a bridge we're going to cross on July the 27th. So
yeah, I can imagine that's quite a difficult bridge to cross. But it sounds like that Joey's got lots of personality, and you have lots of lovely times with her as well. I wanted to go back a bit before the diagnosis. So you mentioned Joey's been diagnosed with DYRK1A syndrome. But can you tell me what it was like before you both, and a bit about your journey and when you suspected maybe something might be wrong and what you did first of all?
I mean, there were hints that things might be wrong before she was born. The measurements were such that they thought there might be intrauterine growth restriction because my belly wasn't as big as it should be for dates. And that was obviously the working hypothesis. And they actually did a scan, an ultrasound quite late on in the pregnancy, which I picked up when I looked at the report, was showing a small head measurement. And I remember querying it with the consultant, who said it was probably measurement artifact and nothing to worry about. But after she was born, she wouldn't latch on. We had to switch to bottle feeding straight away. She was small, and the head measurement actually was small. You could see on the very early one, they must have taken it kind of 3 times to try and get it bigger, probably angling the tape measure, and it had been crossed out and rewritten. That was the pattern. So her head simply did not grow in those early in the way that you would expect. So I was wildly anxious about this right from the get-go, and very adamant very early on that I thought that this, that she was learning disabled. And to be fair, the GP took that seriously. At the 6-week checkup, things weren't quite how they should be. We got in the system very early on, saw a paediatrician, really quite early. So I was, fairly convinced very early. I mean, I'm a clinical psychologist. I've got training in learning disability, a bit more clued into these sorts of things, I guess, than the general public on the whole. And I think the bigger challenge for us wasn't so much the attitude of, the healthcare system. It was more trying to debate this with family, who were very much of the "there's nothing wrong with her" kind of mantra.
She wasn't our first child, so we had experience, and all children are different. But because we had that comparison, all children are different. They're not all. Obviously, there's not a set thing, but we had a benchmark to, in our own minds and hearts, sort of, to know that she was missing things that he'd hit, and something wasn't right. And the parental thing, basically, we're talking about grandparents. It was sort of, there were 2 approaches that they took. One of which was to tell us nothing was wrong because they couldn't bear the idea that me and Sarah were in pain or unhappy. It was just out of pure love. It's just a natural human reaction to say, I'm sure everything's going to be all right. They were just trying to be supportive because that's, what they thought they should say. And then the other approach from other members of the family was, again, from a very, just a supportive, loving aspect, but it was a sort of, they just need a bit of tough love, pull your socks up. Lots of children are different, and you just need to learn ways of dealing with it. And the way I describe it nowadays is that they'd mistaken Joey for someone on the far end of a spectrum of abilities or behaviors, whereas she wasn't really on that spectrum at all. She was on a different spectrum. She wasn't a difficult child. She wasn't a naughty child, was she? She was
a child whose
she
brain hadn't developed.
She was a very, very different child.
Yeah.
So that all of that has gone on over the years. And genetics wise, we had early genetics testing. Kingston Hospital took quite a lot of interest early on, and then they sort of didn't take any interest.
No, it's more that they ran out of technology. So they couldn't pinpoint the diagnosis with the technology they had. I mean, the geneticist was excellent, wasn't he?
Yeah, I love.
We really liked him.
Sarah's going to like this because I'm about to say I love geneticists because they're on the spectrum of doctors. I love them because this guy, one of the guys we saw, just looked at it like a puzzle, and he was sort of excited to solve it, and he really wanted to work out. And in a way, you could have walked away from that and thinking we wanted the bedside manner and we wanted that's terrible. Whereas he really was just he was terribly excited about the whole thing, and he wanted to solve a Sudoku basically. But me and Sarah walked away from that just thrilled because we're the same. I mean, there's not a Sudoku or a crossword that we don't love finishing. So we walked away and thinking these are exactly the people we want involved.
Yeah.
And so when I say they gave up, that's not fair. They just ran out of, they can't spend increasing amounts of money, NHS money. So they tried, Rubenstein Tabey was mentioned.
Yeah, they tested for a whole load. I mean, his attitude was right from the get-go, based on the history, everything else that had been ruled out, dysmorphic features, those kinds of things. I don't know if that's the terminology they would use now, but that this was going to be a chromosomal disorder, and that they would do the tests that were available, but that it was possible that those wouldn't pinpoint it, but that the technology was changing all the time, and that if they didn't find it now, they would in the future. And that was how it played out.
There was one meeting, and I did get a little bit, having said that, I got slightly out, but you didn't, about one of the geneticists who sat there and said, we'll do this test and this test, and if they come back with any interesting things, then we can get really excited. And he used the word excited, and I was sort of a bit, I'm not that excited by all of this, but actually I calmed down quite quickly. And in hindsight, I really wanted someone to get excited by the idea of working out. But then a long time went past, I wouldn't say that we lost interest in finding out what her genetic condition was. We didn't. It's something that became less and less. It wasn't like a holy grail for us. But then the opportunity came along with 100,000 genomes, and we signed up immediately. And then they did that, and it was a few years before that went through the system. And then we had out of the blue, really, we were asked to go and see a geneticist, and we had no idea that this is what it was. I honestly thought it was just a routine sort of, we've got a few more theories or something. And she just said, we found out what it is. And it's like, that moment is, well, we tried to describe it in the TV program, but it is quite hard to describe what goes through your mind when after 13 and a half years, somebody suddenly says, oh, by the way, that thing that happened with your daughter, we've worked out what it is.
I wonder if you could talk a bit about what the diagnosis meant for you both.
It was sort of different for both of us, wasn't it? I was a bit more excited. Sarah was a bit more.
My attitude early on was that while the label would be nice to have, it wouldn't make any material difference to anything to do with. I mean, it was never going to be precise enough that it would give a map out of what we'd expect for her as an individual. And it wasn't going to change the fact that there was a severe learning disability. It wasn't going to change the challenges that we would have over things like schooling, therapies, what the future holds for her. It is useful to have it, but it doesn't really change the day-to-day.
But what it did change, and this is where Unique is so brilliant and important, is that it puts you in touch with people who have children with a similar condition. That's the main takeaway from getting the diagnosis, because Unique is great, and obviously in a broad sense it's great, but to actually meet people and be in touch with people whose children have Dirk-1A. So I've met quite a lot of them now, and I've met quite a few of the children. There was a meetup last year, and you just walk in and you just go, oh my God, oh my God. Little girls running around just the same as Joey, just the same, and the different ages as well. So there were some in their 20s, and there were some just starting out on there, who'd only, very young, been diagnosed. But just to see your life just in front of you is very useful. So that's the basic takeaway, I would say, from the diagnosis.
Yeah, and it must have been really nice to be connected with those other parents and to kind of share experiences as well.
It was, and this applies to every family from Unique that I've ever sort of encountered, actually, and nearly all of the Dirk-1A, because it's spread around the world as well. So there's slight cultural differences, but just to see that they are all of a very similar mindset is comforting, because it sort of makes you think, actually, we haven't been doing this wrong. It's a sense of humour thing. It's an attitude to the world. It's a way they see their children. It's the way they see the outside world. I'm not saying we're all uniform. Of course we're not. But you can see it. When you talk to them, you can just see that they have the same sensibilities as you about the whole thing. And it's sort of quite reassuring, really, that, we're not outliers.
I just wanted to go back to, when you were talking about the bit kind of before the diagnosis, and I wanted to come to you, Sarah, to ask, Sean and Sarah both described their journey with a lot of uncertainty, but I wondered, could you tell me a bit more about the role Unique plays in this part of the journey for parents?
Yes, well, actually, I think Sean's done such a good job of summing up why Unique exists already. Thank you, Sean. But I think really what we're aiming to do is to try to alleviate that sense of helplessness and being overwhelmed and isolation that often families feel when they have a child that's got additional needs. I think our experience with our Unique community is very similar to that Sean and Sarah have described. So many parents know that there is something that their child isn't developing as they would expect. And we hear lots and lots of stories of families going to healthcare professionals and actually not being taken seriously, or like Sean and Sarah saying, everybody saying, no, they're just a bit delayed, it will all be fine. And so I think that's a common experience of many families, that the parents inherently understand and know their child better than everyone else. And it's very common that families have to wait quite a long time to get to that point where they get to a diagnosis. And often I think the uncertainty continues after you get that diagnosis, because as Sean and Sarah said, you get a diagnosis of a rare condition and actually there just isn't that much information available. So at Unique, we try to help in various ways. One is by connecting families with other families, and that might be other families who've got the same condition, but it might also be families who are just going through the same experiences as you are, so that you've got someone to share your journey with. And the other thing we try to do is to help families understand the kinds of genetic testing they've been offered and a bit about the results of genetic testing, because of course genetics is something that lots of people haven't thought about since school, and actually quite often hoped they never had to think about again. Although we're a group supporting families and patients, actually a big part of what we're doing is around sort of translating those complicated genetics terms and trying to explain them to families so they can understand the testing they've been offered, the results of testing, and really what the benefits and limitations of testing are. Sarah said often you get a result and a diagnosis from genetic testing, but it doesn't give you a magic treatment that's going to cure your child. It's really important for all the reasons Sean and Sarah have already said. Just knowing why it's happened, being able to connect with others, being able to meet others, but actually often it doesn't necessarily change treatment.
I guess one thing I would say, just because it was important to us, and it's de novo in our case, but that's comforting to know. We always suspected it was, and we were always told it was, but to have that confirmed means, I mean, we're not going to have any more children, but it's more to do with our son and whether there's something inherent that could be passed on.
Yeah, it gives you information that you can use for either your own family planning or other family members.
You mentioned that Joey received her diagnosis via the 100,000 Genome Project. How did that come about?
I think it was offered as in the 100,000 Genomes Project was the only way that was potentially available at the time. That this was effectively a project that was going on to try to answer those unanswerable questions with the technology they had at the time. I mean, it was years between us enrolling in it and getting the answer.
It's so important to me, in hindsight, the diagnosis, just for all the reasons that we've been discussing. But without doing down the role of genetics, there was a period of Jerry's life when we thought we'd run out of road with the testing, and it wasn't something that really I was obsessed with or occupied my mind massively. It wasn't like me and Sarah were saying, we must get back to Kingston Hospital, we must get back to the geneticist, we must write to the NHS, we must insist that they do this. We'd sort of resigned ourselves to the fact that they'd done all that they could and they hadn't found it, and that's what it was going to be. Having said that, when 100,000 came along, we obviously jumped at the chance. We had no misgivings about it whatsoever. I think we'd resigned ourselves to the fact that we might never know.
I think I thought that at some point we would, because the technology, the methodology that they're using obviously was changing all the time, but it didn't preoccupy me because I didn't think it would make a massive amount of difference. It probably made a bit more difference than I thought it would, for the reasons that Sean and Sarah have said about, particularly the sort of connecting with others, just realizing how useful it is to be able to hear about the similarities and differences that other families experience.
I think a key point for us, and I'm sure this is true for the vast majority of unique families, we never thought that there was a cure. We never, ever thought there was, and nobody in our family did. It's not like anyone was saying, oh, with this treatment or that treatment. There are obviously things, once you know that it's DIRC1A, there's obviously things that you can tailor towards her in terms of therapy, or, there are things that you can do, but we were never under the illusion that if we found out what it was, she could go on some sort of drug would suddenly
we're not
better.
queuing up for experimental stem cell treatments in
No.
weird and wonderful parts of the world. What's happened has happened. Her brain didn't develop properly in utero and beyond. There is no changing that.
But I guess with diagnosis, and like you said, if you can get some relief from some of those other symptoms that are caused by it, then that's some sort of relief for Joey and a bit of help.
yeah, there are absolutely concrete things that you can learn that Joe will never be better, but talking to the other families, eating disorder, that's one of them, constipation, that's another thing, but hearing their experiences, hearing the roads they've gone down, hearing the sort of finding out that there's, a unit somewhere in the country that, specializes in this, that, or the other. These are concrete things. It's not just about emotional support. It's about absolutely about practical support. But there's no magic wand. But there are things that, we've learned that can help.
And then, Sarah, to come to you, then, do you find that families find it difficult to seek out help from Unique once they've received a diagnosis, or are they likely to come quite quickly to you, or what's your experience?
It's a really good question. And of course, we don't know the ones that never find their way to us. But what we try to do at Unique is to be as sort of warm and friendly and welcoming, and so that it's not too daunting. Because I think all of these things are an extra thing for parents who are already busy and dealing with lots of medical appointments and therapies. So we try to make it as easy as possible to join us. Many families do join us at that point of diagnosis because that's when they're looking for more information. Actually, you can get in touch with Unique, and if you decided you didn't want to join us, that's also fine. So we have a helpline that you can call. And for some people, joining a support group just isn't their cup of tea, and that's really fine. Other people find us a little bit later on when, perhaps when their child starts school, or, there's sorts of crunch points where people are looking for extra information or support that they tend to find their way to us. But one of the things we try really hard to do is to get the word out that organizations like ours exist so that we can be contacted if people want to. And lots of our families come, like Sean and Sarah, after the geneticist has told them that we're there. So that's a really important thing for us, is that everybody knows we're there. You can join us and involve yourself as much or as little as you want. So as we've already talked about, one of the things we do is put families in touch with each other, but not all families want that. So, you can join and remain no contact and stay quietly under the radar if you'd like to. But those people often want their child to be sort of counted in the system. When you say how X number of people have DIRC1A, they want their child to be in that number, even if they don't want to go to the meetups or they're not quite ready to do that. And of course, people change. So some people join us and think, we're just going to quietly sit here for a bit, and then change their mind a bit further down the line. And I think, although there she goes, and what Sarah and Sean have said about their journey is really similar to many people's journeys. Of course, everyone's is a bit different, and so people want different things at different times. And what we try to do Unique is to be those things for whenever families need us.
Yeah, and that must be really reassuring for families, knowing that they can come to you whenever they feel ready to, more than anything.
Just to jump in quickly as a sort of user of Unique from the sort of different perspective from Sarah, that is literally how the service presents. That's not an ideal that they aspire to, that's what it's like. So I can confirm that. I mean, people think different things, and within our DIRC1A group, for example, there's a broad range of people who think various things. But the one thing about it and Unique is it's very well self-policed, so people know how to behave. You won't be subjected to ill-informed sort of medical nonsense. It's very well self-policed, but it's also very, very occasionally. I'm speaking for the DIRC1A group. The example they gave me was around COVID and vaccinations, and people have very strong views about it, and these forums aren't the places to be having that sort of discussion.
I think that's exactly it. One of the ways families can connect with each other is via an online forum. And generally, we take quite a light touch in moderating it because the forum is for the families and we want them to feel ownership and that it's their safe space. But yeah, ever so occasionally, it needs just a tiny little bit of input. But yeah, I think Sean's right. Everybody's there for the same reason, and that's to kind of share experiences, sometimes vent about the world, ask questions, and actually celebrate things that other people might not what see as such a celebration. Lots of our families, the children might be late to walk, and it's a place where you can celebrate all of those sorts of things as well.
So next I want to move on to talk about There She Goes. So you mentioned it briefly there, Sarah. So this is the BBC Two comedy drama for which Sean and Sarah were both writers on, and it really draws upon your real life experiences of caring for Joey. And although the series is posed as a gentle comedy, it also displays really frank and honest emotions experienced by Emily and Simon, who are the parents of Rosie in the programme. Let's listen to the poignant clip from the series by Jessica Hines, who plays the mother Emily.
When you're younger and daydream about what family you might have. So, I was the girly swat. Claire always got away with murder. Or when we found out Ben was going to be a boy, if it would be like you and Soph, dorky older brother, Biffy outdoor sister everyone liked. But in none of my dreams was there a girl who was like Rosie. No one ever dreams of a child like Rosie. And I love Rosie. But why do I have to be defined by her? For a long time I felt cheated by her because she wasn't the girl that I dreamt about. She'd taken her place, and then as she got older and I accepted her more, what if it wasn't that she'd taken her place? What if she just pushed in the queue, and then if we started again, then if I had a normal girl, and then I wouldn't have to resent Rosie anymore, because I'll have the family that I'd always wanted, and I'd have Rosie as well. Yeah. This after all these years. Haven't I earned that?
Off the back of that, I wondered if you could both tell me a bit more about what it meant for you being able to write for the programme, and what it's meant in the aftermath as well.
So it came about. I basically am a TV writer, and Sarah's a psychologist, but it came about primarily because I was trying to think of something to write about, and we realised that we had that Joey's just an incredible character who isn't. Those sort of children aren't featured on mainstream television really at all, I would say. And so we thought it would be an interesting thing to do, but from that sort of slightly selfish sort of motive, I wrote an episode and Sarah read it and said, "You're not doing that. It's not honest enough." So Sarah came on board as a writer with me, and we co-wrote it. The whole thing's co-written. And it's the most important piece of work I've ever done, ever will do. And it became far more than just a TV program. The first series went out and we had a screening, and Unique came to the screening along with some of the other charities. And we were so terrified of what the response would be. And the fact that the response was what it was, which was overwhelmingly, it's like looking at our own lives on television. It was recognition. It wasn't nothing to do with whether the stupid jokes were funny or anything. It was purely whether, if anyone had turned around and said this has got nothing to do with what it's like bringing up our child or my brother or sister or whatever, that would have been quite bad for us. But it wasn't, and that's been the overwhelming response since. It's been it's thank you for putting our life on television, because it's not normally on television. So it became that. And so the second series was even more about that. And then the third, the special that we did, was almost totally aimed at, we need to tell these stories because there are so many people in this country who this story isn't being told for them. And it so happened that Joey hit puberty and had some very, very, very problematic behaviours, sort of self-harming behaviours. It happened quite close to her being diagnosed. So we thought, well, this story sort of is just written for us. Joey's written it for us. So we just sort of wrote down what happened. That was sort of what it was. And then obviously the response to that was very good. So yeah, and we wanted to feature Unique because that was such an important part of what we'd been through. So yeah, it went from me wanting to further my career to that having nothing to do with it, and me wanting to tell the story of rare children with rare chromosomal disorders and learning disability, and that's what it became.
I'm sure it must have been almost quite cathartic, I imagine, in a way, to share your story that way, and also, give you a real sense of accomplishment to be able to kind of share your story on that platform. Like you said, like it's never been done before in such a way, and to get that kind of response from other families, it must have really, it just helped you both in your journey as well, I can imagine.
For me, because it's what I do for a living, it still retained a certain sense of my job, and I mean, emotionally, obviously, I'm entirely committed to it. For you, all the bits that make you sort of cry, or all the bits that are like, oh my god, Sarah wrote. I wrote all the stupid bits that David Tennant says, but so I think it was more cathartic for you. I think you really had to dig deep into some
Yeah,
quite unpleasant memories.
it was, yeah, it wasn't always the most comfortable process. You know, we'd sort of agree. I mean, particularly in the earlier process, we'd sort of have a little think about what we wanted to talk about, and then I'd go off and like kind of delve deep into memory and just type a stream of consciousness, and I'd be sitting there sobbing, with tears rolling down my face, just reliving these really awful experiences. But yeah, I think the end process ended up being cathartic, and a lot of that was stuff that I would never have imagined sharing with anybody, let alone, this huge audience of people, which, yeah, strange how things evolve.
Yeah, I think it was possibly, if we hadn't done this, then we might have just tried to not think about these things and not bring them back. And I think we probably wouldn't have spoken to each other. We may have, I don't know what would have happened, but I don't think these things would have come out into the open. And very interestingly, another side aspect of it in the catharsis way is the effect the program had on the wider family. There were certain members of the family who were really shaken by that program, really shaken, because they had a set view. Even as Joey got older, they had a set view of the history and what had happened and why, and they were really shaken by the idea that they're out of love. Again, there's nothing bad here, but they were really shaken by the idea that their actions had a detrimental effect on us when Joe was born. The idea that, there were people saying, well, I didn't say that there was nothing wrong with her, and I didn't say this or that. But actually, when you see it presented in the program, then there was a lot of reevaluation that went on, in a good way, in a positive way, and it's all good.
I think there's something about seeing it, and especially given, we were so fortunate with the cast, because they're so good at portraying it. And I think there's a power in seeing things played out rather than just hearing about them in the abstract.
Yeah, definitely. It was very, I've definitely had moments of crying and laughing and all sorts of range of emotions while I was watching it. So yeah, definitely very powerful. And I guess it's really great for other families going through similar circumstances for their families to see what's happening. And, there's a lot that can be learned from the program as well. So, it's a really powerful piece that you put together.
I would really like to echo that, is that I think Sean and Sarah have said before that they didn't do it to represent everybody's experience, but actually that is exactly what it has provided. I would say that huge numbers of people are really grateful that that portrayal is there, so that they can be seen and heard and understood so brilliantly. But it has provided them, other families, with the opportunity to show it to their friends and family so that they understand their life as well. And so I think it's had a hugely positive reaction from our unique community. And I think it's not always an easy watch. I think lots of families would say it's challenging to see it up close in front of you, but I think it's really cathartic and has been just incredibly powerful at showing these sorts of stories, which, as you said, just don't get shown very often. And I think particularly when we think that rare conditions, although they're individually rare, if you put all of the rare chromosome conditions together, they're not actually that rare. So these are stories that are going on up and down the country and all over the world.
Just to follow up on something Sarah said earlier on about that you can take as much or little as you like from Unique. It's the same with the show. I've had lots of people get in touch with me or talk to me in person and said, I'm really sorry, I tried to watch There She Goes and I can't watch it. And I have to say, don't apologise. You nothing to apologise for. You take what you need from it. If you can't watch it, then don't watch it. If you can watch it, then do. There is literally no right or wrong way of doing this. It really isn't. But having said that, there was the nicest comment one of the nicest comments I've seen was on the Dirk forum. It was someone who casually referred to it as our show, as in the Dirk 1A community. It belongs to them, and that little tear ran down my face.
Oh, yeah, must have been a lovely thing for you to read. That's really nice.
Also from the unique and general community of people who have rare conditions community, it's been so fantastic for raising awareness about genetic testing and rare conditions in general. And there just isn't because these stories don't get talked about or shown about very often. It's been really great from that point of view as well.
And hopefully this will be the catalyst for similar programs and more things in the mainstream media as well. And you did touch on it briefly there, Sarah, about what the program's meant for Unique, with and the Unique community being very supportive. But have more people reached out to Unique since the program?
I think the main takeaway is that being heard, our families being heard and represented, which I think is really important. But yes, we got lots and lots of new families that have come to us through watching There She Goes. And it was really fortuitous that when the special aired last summer, it was the evening before our awareness day, which I think was a complete coincidence, but actually turned out to be really great timing. So we got lots and lots of new families get in touch with us, many of whom then went on to join us. But actually, what it also did was get lots of members who'd been members for a long time, but perhaps had been a bit quiet or hadn't been in touch. So it sort of also reinvigorated that engagement from other members who we might not have heard about for ages and who might have got older children and had been in touch at the point when they were diagnosed and then hadn't been. So it has just been such a brilliant experience to have Unique as part of it. And I think that's really important that at Unique we have members from 120 different countries, and the reason is that when you have these rare conditions, you're really unlikely to find someone in the same town as you, possibly not even the same country, with some rare conditions. And so the idea that you can connect with people all over the world, I think, is really important, particularly in rare conditions.
Yeah, that's great. And hopefully, it just continues to increase support with Unique, and, families know they can still come to you as a resource, and as that continues. So I just wanted to kind of wrap up here and come to the final question. So, your story highlights a lot of challenges, a lot of difficulties, a lot of ups and downs. But I just wondered, Sean and Sarah, if you had any advice for other parents going through similar circumstances.
Yeah, I think one of the things is what I just said, which is I would tell people there's no right or wrong way of doing this. I would say, from my experience, don't be hard on yourself, and you're going to think that you wish it never happened to you, and that's fine. That is absolutely fine. That's normal. We've all thought that. It doesn't make you a bad parent. It makes you a human being, normal human being. I would say to get in touch with Unique. If I shied away a little bit from help and charities because I think it was a sort of pride. I think I had a preconception that it would be glass half full, put on a happy smile, best foot forward, blitz spirit, sort of. Well, they're all. We have encountered it a little bit over the years, not very much, but we've encountered a little bit of, as long as you love them, that's the most important thing, and that all children are, which is fine, and that's an okay perspective to have. But it's like there are times when it's just not what you want to hear. I want to be allowed to feel the feelings that I'm having without feeling guilty. So I would encourage people to seek support from Unique or from wherever. But generally, the thing I've learned about people is that the vast, vast majority of people are nice and kind and understanding about this. Not everyone, but most people are good people. And, people should remember that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I was going to say in terms of advice to other people is something Sean said already, which is that don't be harsh on yourself, because you're allowed to find it difficult. I would also say it's okay to grieve the child that you didn't have that you thought you were going to have. I just think that's so important. And I think for me, the most difficult thing in the early couple of years was feeling like I couldn't do that because nobody appreciated that I'd actually lost anything. The world seems to use the word difference a lot at the minute. These children are different, they're differently abled, but actually it is disability and it is more difficult. There are rewards, there are positives, but, she's 17 and a half now, our daughter. When our son was 17 and a half, the challenges were different, but they were also nowhere near as big. And I don't think that should get lost, because I think parents need to feel it's okay to get the help they need and to push for the help they need, and not feel like they've just got to kind of put on a brave face. And as Sean was saying, the attitude sometimes of, well, you've just got to get on with it, because while you do, actually, you do need help to do that. It is difficult.
The only other thing I'd say is, just because Sarah just mentioned it and it gets forgotten, is the siblings thing. And the families with Unique will have all manner of different configurations. I can only speak from our own experience, but Joe has an elder brother, Frank, who is, well, in my opinion, the best human being in the world. And I'm sure in his mother's opinion as well. But my experience, never forget about the toll it takes on siblings. Because Frank is a very, very loving brother. Only last night, Joey was typing Frank book because he's gone to university. She likes looking at pictures of him in the photo albums. She likes looking at pictures of old toys mainly.
Yeah. But she likes looking at her and Frank as a baby and
so,
all the toys they had. Yeah.
But yeah, it's not really advice. It's just, there's a danger that Joey could have taken over our entire family life. And especially Sarah made sure that didn't happen. And that, we were a unit and he was, but it is possible that it can swallow up your entire life.
Okay, so we'll wrap the interview up there. Thank you so much to our guests Sean Pye, Sarah Crawford and Sarah Wynne for joining us today as we discussed Sean and Sarah's journey to Joey's diagnosis and how charities like Unique can support families of those living with rare conditions. If you'd like to hear more like this, please subscribe to The G Word on your favourite podcast app. Thank you for listening. I've been your host and producer, Naimah, and this podcast was edited by Bill Griffin at Ventu Digital.